The history of the Jewish people began more than 3,000 years ago. In the desert, an idea developed of the one and only God, one who tolerates no other gods but him. Monotheism was an idea that would change the world. War and persecution scattered the Jews all around the world. It's a story of splendor and suffering that leads right up to the present day. They've left their mark as great thinkers, scientists and artists. How did the Jews manage to maintain their identity over all these years? The Jews, history of a people. Jerusalem, 450 BC. For centuries, the city's been fought over. Time and again, the Jewish people have been at the mercy of superior conquerors. After a long captivity in Babylon, the Jews are finally allowed to return to their homeland. In Jerusalem, the last to arrive are being impatiently awaited. They are being led by the priest and scribe Ezra. He and his followers bring gold and jewelry with them. Jerusalem must be resurrected and be the center of the Jewish faith, the belief in the one God. With Ezra's help, the Jews want to rebuild the temple that the Babylonians destroyed. Part 1. Exodus. Ezra's knowledge and his patience are vaunted everywhere. Soon the people of Jerusalem will vote him their religious leader. They kept their people's memories and stories in the foreign land. The creation of the world, the first people and the great flood. Stories of heroes and warriors full of wonder and mystery. Revelations and laws of their God. Now they're compiling all of these religious traditions for the rest of time. Thus, the Torah was created, the book of teaching and the law. To this day, this book stands at the center of the Jewish religion, but the Torah is not of significance only for Jews. It resembles the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the first part of the Christian Bible. The Torah is one of our few sources concerning the origin of the Jewish people. The book of Exodus plays a central role. It tells a dramatic story that probably began more than 3,000 years ago. It is written that God appeared to the shepherd Moses in a burning bush and gave him a mission. I have seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. For 400 years, the Jews have lived in Egyptian servitude. Now Moses begs Pharaoh, "Let my people go." But the Egyptian ruler declines. So God brings plagues and natural disasters onto the land. And when all the firstborn of the Egyptians die, Pharaoh lets the Israelites go free. But he sends his soldiers in pursuit. The book of Exodus tells the fate of the Israelites. With God's help, they manage to escape through the sea. The Egyptians drown in the floods. Moses is leading the Israelites through the desert. What keeps them going is their hope for God's promised land, flowing with milk and honey. Young and old, men, women and children. 600,000 people, so it is said, and their goal is freedom, a life without slavery. To this day, Jews celebrate Passover and remember their exodus, their flight from Egypt. It is said that they left quickly and in secret. There was no time to prepare sourdough for their bread. That's why Jews still eat matzah at Passover, the unleavened bread. They also eat salted eggs, bitter herbs and other foods whose colour and texture resemble Egyptian clay and whose taste reminds them of bitter times. Today, Passover is the focal point because it means liberation. Not just the liberation of Israel and the beginning of the history of the Jewish people. Up to that time, history was, as is told by Genesis, the history of the individual, of patriarchs, of families, and of clans. But in Exodus, Israel enters the world stage as a people, divided into tribes, it is true, but they are a unit. This history begins with liberation. But that also means that Passover is a symbol of freedom. The basic freedom that everyone is entitled to, not just Israel. The path to freedom is hard. In the third month, the fugitives reach Sinai. This peninsula lies between Egypt and modern-day Israel. The Israelites are said to have fought their way to the Promised Land through this inhospitable environment. They don't have enough water or food. Every day is a test. Is God really with them? On Mount Sinai, so it is written in the Bible, God appears to Moses once more. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me from among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. The 2,300-meter Jabal Musa, the mountain of Moses, is said to be the place where this covenant was made. To this day, it's a place of great significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Moses brings 2 stone tablets with him from the summit, into which the 10 Commandments are chiseled. They regulate people's relationship to God and are also the ethical bedrock of civilization. The first commandments are, I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have none other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, nor any likeness. Shocking commandments, new and alien. All the other cultures all around worship many gods and make likenesses and statues of them. The Israelites alone are to believe their God to be so great that there is no room for other gods and that no image could represent him. Again and again, Moses reminds the people of God's words. And if you shall reject my statutes and break my covenant, I also will do this unto you. I will appoint terror over you, even consumption and fever that shall consume the eyes and make the soul to pine away. The Torah contains a further 603 injunctions. They regulate the whole of life, from waking to sleeping, from the cradle to the grave. It's the duty of every Jew to follow them, but they also give security and strength in the ebb and flow of history in every place on earth. One important commandment also demands the circumcision of every male Jew 8 days after his birth. Just like their forefathers, every male Jewish infant is circumcised 8 days after his birth as a symbol of his covenant with God. This important symbolic act marks his initiation into the Jewish world and is celebrated with a big party. This covenant is of great importance for the people of Israel. It's very difficult to live such a covenant because the human being must be convinced that it's not only his acts that speak of his relationship with God, but also his body. Circumcision is a painful, incomprehensible step that frightens parents before they do this to their son.
וזהו צעד שמביא הרבה פחד להורים לפני שהם עושים את זה לבן שלהם.
The prayer straps, known as tefillin, also remind faithful Jews of the unbreakable covenant with God.
ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו
Every little box
במצוותיו
contains 4
וציוונו
Torah texts
על
written on
מצוות
parchment. And it shall be for a sign unto thee upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand hath the Lord brought thee out of Egypt.
טרם כל יציר נברא, לעת נשא בחפצו כל, אזי מלך שמו נקרא.
It is written that the Israelites wandered through the desert for 40 years. Then they reached Mount Nebo in modern-day Jordan. It was here that Moses set eyes on the Promised Land, and once again he heard God's voice. This is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. Moses was never to reach the destination of their long journey. He died and was buried at an unknown location. Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. To this day it remains the land of longing for many Jews. According to biblical dating, the Israelites entered Canaan around 1300 BC. There they met other peoples with whom they will be at war time and again over the coming centuries. On their way to the Promised Land, the Israelites carry the Ark of the Covenant with them. They keep the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments that sealed their contract with God in this golden chest. The portable shrine is the visible sign for them and their enemies. God is always with us. After conquering the land, the Israelites are said to have congregated in Shiloh for the time being, which is between Jerusalem and modern-day Nablus. For the first time, they have a fixed centre for their shrine. The time of wandering seems over. The nomads become settled. But was their exodus really as the Bible tells it? Many scholars today doubt this account. The conquest of Canaan by the Israelites is also contested. Indefatigable archaeologists are looking for definitive traces. Israel Finkelstein from the University of Tel Aviv questions many biblical events.
Archaeology has shown in the last century or so that many of the sites which are mentioned in the text in relation to the conquest story simply did not exist, were not inhabited, so to speak, at that time. And secondly, we know today that the fall of the Canaanite system, Egypto-Canaanite system, was a long process. So we are not dealing with a military conquest of Canaan by a group of people who march under one leadership and take, one city after the other.
The Torah isn't a historical treatise. It's a book of faith in which the birth of a people is recorded. The shrine has its place in Shiloh, but at the moment it's still a tabernacle, a tent, a portable temple as a symbol of the unconsolidated condition of the young state. Many hundreds of years later, Ezra the priest and other scholars write down the history of their ancestors. This is how the Israelites are said to have settled in different places after their exodus. Only weakly allied with each other, they were, however, surrounded by powerful enemies. The Israelites were dissatisfied, so it is written. Their tribal leaders, the judges, were no longer adequate. The demands of the people grew louder and louder. That we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us and fight our battles. It is intended that the old judge, Samuel, who was living in Shiloh, should anoint this king. The wise Samuel accepts the task, even though he warns of the dangers of an abuse of power. But his objections fall on deaf ears, and so Saul becomes the first king of Israel, and the loose association of tribes becomes a state. Is it not that the Lord hath anointed thee to be prince over his inheritance? The main enemies of Saul and his young kingdom are the Philistines. The maritime nation has a well-organized army and powerful weapons. They steal the Ark of the Covenant more than once. In their fight against the Philistines, it is one Israelite in particular who attracts attention, the shepherd boy David. With a simple slingshot, he subdued the huge Philistine Goliath, so it is said. King Saul is jealous of young David. He fears him as a rival and exiles him. In exile, David makes a name for himself as a relentless warrior. The victory over Goliath becomes the symbol of the successful battle of one who is weaker against a more powerful enemy, and David is the symbol of a hero par excellence. Even though not everything written about him resounds to his honor.
There are parts of the story, let's say in the book of Samuel, where we do have, I think, texts describing David in a genuine historical way. When you have David as a troublemaker living on the margin of society, going with his gang, extortion here, protecting a city there, running away from Saul, making troubles. This is probably historical.
David and his soldiers are in a war camp when a messenger arrives at the tent. He has tragic news, the messenger says. He only just managed to escape the enemy. He says he has Saul's headdress and his armband. Saul fell in the battle against the Philistines. David appears shaken. The king is dead? According to tradition, he tore his shirt. Honest mourning or cold calculation. Only a short while later, David is crowned king. David conquers the town of Jebus from the Jebusites living there. From now on, it is called Jerusalem, and he is victorious against the invading Philistines. Very soon, the king is ruling over a large kingdom, so it is written in the Bible. The city of Jerusalem is the new capital. It is here that David brings the Holy of Holies of the Israelites, the Ark of the Covenant, with the stone tablets of the law. The oldest part of the city still carries his name today, Ir David, City of David. Archaeologist Ronnie Reich is leading the excavations here. There are hardly any finds from the legendary times of King David and his son Solomon. A terraced complex is the exception. At first it was ignored when archaeologists excavated it around 1970.
It became important the moment that scholars started to question the problem of what we call the 10th century BC, the days of Solomon, David and Solomon in Jerusalem. And then saying that we don't have much of this period of time in Jerusalem, so suddenly the stepped structure is actually the only architectural element which might, in some, according to some interpretation, might belong to this period of time. And it is a big thing. It's not just a private house.
For a long time, these ruins were the only remains. But in 1993, archaeologists made a sensational discovery. A stone fragment was found in Tel Dan. The Hebraic inscription mentions the House of David. It's the only non-biblical confirmation for the existence of his dynasty. In order to crown his life's work, David wants to build God a temple, but God fends him off. "Thou shalt not build an house unto my name, because thou hast shed much blood upon the earth in my sight." It was only David's son, Solomon, who built the first temple on a hill near the city of David. Now the city is not only the seat of the king, but also the center of the faith. According to the Bible, there was a room in the interior of the temple that was only accessible to the high priests. And the priests brought in the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord unto its place, into the oracle of the house, to the most holy place, even under the wings of the cherubim. But were the city and the temple really as big as they were described?
In the 10th century BC, Jerusalem was a very small town, maybe a village, not fortified, no monumental buildings. The temple itself was probably kind of a modest building, the shrine of the dynasty, the chapel of the dynasty, if you wish, and there could have been a modest palace as well. Jerusalem grows to become a big city, an influential city, in the late 8th century, when Judah is incorporated into the Assyrian global world economy.
The Bible remains the only testimony to the temple's existence. An exact search for evidence of remains of the legendary building is not possible for religious and political reasons, because these days the Muslim Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque stand here. After Solomon's death, the kingdom breaks into two: Israel in the north and Judea in the south. For more than 200 years they lived side by side in hostile coexistence, always in danger of being overrun by a more powerful enemy. Right into the 8th century, their religious customs are hardly different from those of other peoples around the Mediterranean. Monotheism hasn't yet asserted itself. At this time, they still worship other gods besides the one god, such as the ancient bull god, El. From time to time, God even has a wife, the ancient Syrian goddess Asherah. It's a good time for prophets, articulate men who warn of a return to pagan customs. Fearless, they make themselves into the voice of God's messages. They are both social critics and soothsayers. The prophet Jeremiah is one of those who demands penance and a return to stricter ways. Otherwise, God would send a terrible tribunal and Jerusalem would perish. For who shall have pity upon thee, O Jerusalem? Or who shall bemoan thee? Or who shall turn aside to ask of thy welfare? Thou hast rejected me, saith the Lord. Thou art gone backward. The threats from external enemies are growing. Within the city walls, there is hardly a single well. The abundant Gihon source lies outside of the city walls. Then, in the 8th century, Hezekiah, king of Judea, plans an extraordinary project. the building of a tunnel for water, and so it is also written in the Bible. This same Hezekiah also stopped the upper spring of the waters of Gihon and brought them straight down on the west side of the city of David, and Hezekiah prospered in all his works. A tunnel below the city was already discovered in the 19th century. For a long time it was disputed whether this was the 8th century biblical tunnel or not. In 2003, researchers from Jerusalem decided to investigate the ancient tunnel. With the help of radiometry, they examined the tunnel walls. The result is a sensation.
We managed here to date very accurately the oldest structure described in the Bible. There is no structure in the Bible described in the Old Testament which has been really dated by scientific methods.
But how did workers of the Bronze Age manage to build a 530-metre tunnel into the mountain without losing their bearings? Especially since they dug from both ends at the same time, as a contemporary inscription records. Did they simply follow the natural course of the water? This is also a question that researchers are investigating by examining tears and gaps in the stone. After underground research that took months, Arya Shimron is convinced that the tunnel is an architectural masterwork.
How were they possibly directed towards each other? That was done by simply acoustic communication, by guiding teams on the surface. Surface team, underground team, they heard each other. And the surface team was able to guide the carving teams underground towards each other. But since the sound communication is not really all that precise, it also then explains why the tunnel zigzags and swings around and does all kinds of funny things rather than goes in a straight line.
A new means of obtaining water can prolong a siege, but it can't prevent a war. In 586 BC, the Babylonians conquer Jerusalem. Jeremiah's prophecies come true. Then the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes, and the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the house of the people with fire, and brake down the walls of Jerusalem. This is what the book of Jeremiah writes about the event that was to change the fate of Judea for a long time to come. The Babylonian ruler, Nebuchadnezzar II, has yet more plans for Judea's population. After the destruction of Jerusalem, he takes the Judean upper class to Babylon as spoils of war. The simple people are allowed to stay in the country or emigrate to neighboring Egypt. The Judeans have lost their religious center and their land. Jerusalem is in ashes. Will they also lose their faith in God? Judea is assimilated into the Babylonian kingdom that stretches from the Mediterranean to Persia. In the center of this vast empire lies the legendary city of Babylon. It is the time of Nebuchadnezzar II. Babylon is a city of superlatives. Witnesses are awestruck by its magnificence. The houses are built of solid brick walls. The Tower of Babel is legendary, and the Hanging Gardens are among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In around 500 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote, Babylon wasn't just a fairly large city, but it was also the most beautiful city of all the ones we know of. At the beginning of the 20th century, the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey excavated a city that had long been forgotten. Most Judeans are living a good life in their Babylonian exile. Women and children can move about freely, and many men are working as officials at the court. The generations that grow up here only know their home from the stories of the elders. Their memories sound like a promise. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered thee, O Sion. They called Jerusalem Zion, the city chosen by God and his people. For them, it was the embodiment of the promised land. Their hope to one day return and their faith in their God united them in these foreign lands. In 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus conquers Babylon and allows the Judeans to return home. Some decide to stay and found the Babylonian community that was to remain in existence for more than 2,000 years. Cyrus thus ensured himself an important place in Jewish history. Was it political calculation or clemency towards the conquered peoples? On the so-called Cyrus Cylinder, which is now in the British Museum in London, the ruler had his achievements recorded. I, Cyrus, king of this vast empire, king of the four shores of the world, I brought the gods who were living there back to their place. I got all their people together and brought them back to their homes.
I don't think this was the only example that was written under Cyrus. I think there must have been many proclamations issued about what was going to happen, and in the authorship of the Old Testament, this was using the same terminology in some cases as the original Babylonian text, interpreted that Cyrus was the messenger of the God of the Jews and that he had come specially to rescue the Jews in their predicament. But the Jewish people are not mentioned in this text at all, and the understanding that we have now and the fame of the cylinder from this point of view is based on the fact that the Jewish authors interpreted, as it were, for their own reasons, something which Cyrus was saying for his own reasons.
For many scholars, the history of the Jews begins with the return from exile. This is the first time they speak of Jews. They are faced by a great challenge. Ezra and other scholars compile the Torah from writings and other traditions. It reinforces the confidence of a small country that could always fall victim to its superior neighbors again.
The goals of the people in Jerusalem in late monarchic times, before the destruction, and the goals of the temple community without a king then, after they came back from Babylonia, are the same goals. And both are dealing with giving an identity and with building the boundaries for the nation. And both do that with mainly two platforms. There's the platform of the law, which is extremely important, the book of Deuteronomy and so on. And then there's the second platform, the platform of history, which explains how it all began, what happened, what went wrong, how it can be fixed, and what to do in order to have a better future. And the history part is also extremely important for giving the framework, the boundaries, the ethnic boundaries, the identity.
The Shrine of the Book is in the Israel Museum. Here, the oldest Torah texts that have been so far found are kept. They are copies of copies. They come from Qumran on the Dead Sea. They were written down at around 240 BC. The Torah became the most influential text of the past 2,500 years. Its triumphant march also resulted from its being part of the Christian Bible. For devout Jews, the Torah isn't a text that developed over time, but a godly revelation. Every Torah roll has to be treated with the utmost care and can only be written by hand. The sofer, the Torah writer, needs years of practice. Every one of the 300,000 letters is carefully formed. Since it's seen as a living object, it's only allowed to be made of natural materials. It is written on vellum with a turkey or goose quill. Utmost concentration is required because any mistake would make the Torah unusable. As befits its sacred status, the Torah is kept in a special ark, the Holy Ark, as it is here in the synagogue in Augsburg. Every time it's taken out of the shrine, the cantor sings a song in its honor. For its protection and decoration, it is enveloped in decorative velvet and fitted with a crown of silver and gold. The envelope is only taken off for a reading. One can't imagine Judaism and the Jewish people without the Torah. But now one has to ask, what does the Torah mean? Is it the 5 books of Moses per se, or the whole body of Jewish wisdom and teaching that arise from the Torah? And we have to take the Torah as a whole, and not just the 5 books of Moses in the narrow sense. Of course, they are the anchor point of the whole, but there is a vast body of literature that is based on the Torah and that comes out of the Torah. And the whole of Jewish life in all its aspects is shaped by the Torah. So without a Torah, there would be no Judaism, no Jewish people. It became the constitution of the Jews in the middle of the 5th century. In 332 BC, the Greek Macedonian ruler Alexander the Great conquers the Mediterranean's east coast. Soon, Judea also belongs to his vast realm. Even though Alexander's empire fell apart shortly after his death, Hellenic civilization influenced the entire region for centuries to come. Numerous cities were constructed on the Greek model. One of the most important is Marissa. These days, there is little evidence of the city's former size in Israel's barren landscape. The whole mountain is covered in a network of caves and cisterns made by the one-time inhabitants of Marissa. One of the biggest is the Columbarium cave. Pigeons were bred in 2,000 niches as homing pigeons, sacrificial animals, or simply as food. The necropolis, which is Greek for city of the dead, that is, a cemetery. It has only recently been restored. Greek culture, their sense of beauty and their worldly joie de vivre pervade the everyday lives of the Jewish inhabitants. The rich upper class is particularly fascinated. The stately tombstones, such as those here in the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem, have Greek models. The superficiality of the foreigners and their influence alarms the devout Jews. In the first book of the Maccabees, it is written that, "Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen." Judas is the scion of an old Jewish line of priests. Right from the start, he's brought up to despise Greek culture. The polytheism of the occupying forces is idolatry and therefore a grave crime. It angers his father, the priest Mattathias. Particularly those Jews who conform too much are an abomination to him. 1,000 times he's preached to his son to stay away from the unfaithful. The situation escalates. In 178 BC, the successors of the Greek ruler Alexander attack Jerusalem and dedicate the temple to the god Zeus. King Antiochus forbids the reading of the Torah and circumcision. He sends soldiers to force the population to worship Greek gods. They come to Modi'in, the home village of Judas and his family. The priest Mattathias adjures the inhabitants. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. In a rage, Mattathias kills the commander-in-chief. The family flees into the mountains. Soon, more and more followers come to join them. For many decades, the rebels fight the occupation. After his father's death, Judas takes over the leadership. He gets the epithet Maccabi, the hammer. His biggest triumph? Judas Maccabeus reconquers the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and drives off the Hellenized Jews. He destroys the statue of Zeus and dedicates the temple to the God of the Jews again, on the 25th of Kislev, the third month of the Jewish calendar. According to legend, only a small bottle of ritual oil was left. It is said to have fed the flame of the menorah, the seven-branched candelabrum, for 8 days. The fundamental message of the Hanukkah miracle is addition. Just as we add a candle every day until we have 8, so too every Jew and every human being should become better every day and should never be satisfied with what they have already accomplished. Since 1995, 50 years after the Holocaust, the Jewish community in Frankfurt has been openly celebrating Hanukkah again. Every year, around December, Orthodox and liberal Jews meet in front of the old opera house. The celebration unites them with each other and with their ancestors. In the second book of the Maccabees, it is written that they ordained also by a common statute and decree that every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Jews. The celebration of the dedication of the temple marks the glorious climax of the revolt. The story of the heroic resistance of the Maccabees is told to this day. When Judas died, his brothers continued the fight. His descendants continued to rule the independent state for another 200 years. In 66 BC, the Roman general Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus conquers Asia Minor. Judea becomes part of the Roman province of Syria and is incorporated into the Roman superpower. From now on, the city on the Tiber will determine the fate of the Jewish people. Here, a man enters the political arena who is despised by the Jewish people and feared by them because of his unscrupulousness: Herod the Great. The Roman Senate declares Herod king of Judea. Rome will protect him as long as he represents Rome's interests. He survives several changes of power at the head of the Roman state through charm and diplomacy. When he ascends his Judean throne, the real power behind him is actually Rome. The king reciprocates. He builds a huge port on the Mediterranean coast. It becomes the biggest town in Judea, bigger even than Jerusalem. In honor of the Roman Caesars, he names it Caesarea Maritima. Herod commissions the best engineers. The city was not to be inferior to Roman examples in any way. The artificial harbour complex becomes the biggest in the eastern Mediterranean. There's enough space for an entire Roman legion. Herod is mostly concerned about the effect of the huge buildings. He wants to modernize the state and impress his subjects. The port of Caesarea is a destination for trading ships from all across the Roman world. A tax-free zone is created to attract wealthy potential traders. Caesarea becomes the showpiece of the entire region. Luxurious villas, a forum, theatre, public baths and different temples are all to be found there. Added to this is a circus in which chariot races take place. The city regularly hosts sporting contests and other mass events.
הורדוס נחשף אישית בעיניו.
Herod personally experienced the power of Roman architecture. He saw the force and charisma of the temples, theatres, circuses with his own eyes. That's why he wanted to introduce them in his realm too, because he saw in them the pinnacle of culture. He probably wasn't a great intellectual. Jerusalem also still bears the signature of Herod. Everywhere the remains of his imposing construction projects are to be found. The Cardo, the great shopping street, still runs through Jerusalem's Old Town. Nearby, archaeologists excavated Herod's residential area in the 1970s. This is where the rich and beautiful lived as luxuriously as they did in Rome, with baths, floor heating, and elaborately painted walls. The majority of the people remain suspicious. They see the ambitious parvenu Herod as a lackey of the Romans. The king curries favor among the people. One major building project is meant to silence the critics, particularly the devout Jews. A new temple is proposed, which will even eclipse Solomon's temple. It is designed to have an inner courtyard which can accommodate vast crowds of pilgrims. This is how Herod wants to go down in history. His plan works. For a while, Herod even manages to unite religious splinter groups. The construction of the temple doesn't just increase the prestige of the king, but also that of the Jewish religion in the world. It also breathes new life into Judean trade, and Jerusalem becomes a metropolis in which 100,000 people live. Herod, however, doesn't live to see its dedication. He dies 60 years earlier. Even 2,000 years later, the size of the area gives an idea of the overwhelming impression that the complex must have made on its visitors. By far the most famous city of the East is what the Roman writer Pliny the Elder called ancient Jerusalem. Will the peace between the Jews and the Romans keep? Will the small rebellious people come to terms with foreign rule?